Hand Cannot Erase. New Steven Wilson album here in 2015. It's our job to talk about this today, dissect it, review it, but before I do that, Nation, I do have to kind of address something, and it's specific toward the creator of this album. Share this with him if you like. It's really just something I would like to say. Steven Wilson, you've been probably one of my favorite musicians for the past 15 years, ever since I heard my first Porcupine Tree song. And the best thing about your music is that you consistently, with each album that has come out, have found a way to exceed my expectations by basically, my expectations are present and you just kind of ignore them and do something that's completely transformative and different and totally blow my expectations away. And that's one thing that I respect about you as a musician, because your vision usually has a higher purpose, and the expectations that we have are just, there's a lot of unknown, but we always leave satisfied. But I don't know if you will fully grasp at first what you've done with Hand Cannot Erase, mainly because I myself can't fully grasp it. This 66-minute long album, which I would not be able to listen to in an entire setting after the World Health Organization's article from yesterday. For those of you who haven't seen that reaction, check out the video link, which is probably in the description box or somewhere around my face. This 66-minute long album is probably and arguably one of the more transformative albums of 2015 and probably of the past, I would say 5 to 10 years. We've had some great albums that have surfaced and come to light within the past number of years, ever since this channel first started. We've had a couple of perfect score albums. We've had a couple of wonderful works. Hand Cannot Erase definitely feels like it would contend very well with all of those albums, including those that have had perfect scores, and there's a reason for that. First of all, we have to consider the story of this album. The story is one that it's kind of a left turn in the right field, so to speak. We have an individual who's pretty popular, who is well known, who is loved, respected by friends and family alike, who just goes missing for the period of 3 years. And really, the fact of the matter is, this lady was not missing. She had died, and it seemed like nobody noticed. It seemed like nobody paid any mind. Nobody actively sought her out or tried to find her. She just went missing for 3 years, but that's because she had died. And wow, first off, what a cerebral and haunting tone, just as a storyboard, for an album. Because it plays into probably one of all of our most fearful thoughts that kind of populate our brains, whether it be before we sleep at night or while we're sipping coffee during the day. What happens after we die? Are we going to be noticed enough where if it were to happen in the middle of the night, randomly, with nobody else around to see, would it change anything? Would people seek us out? Would somebody care enough to try to find us? And this is an album that plays on that fear with unbelievable precision and cerebral thought. Musically speaking, I can only say that this feels like Steven Wilson has incorporated elements throughout his various bands, his various projects throughout the years. Maybe not all. He may not have delved too deeply into the workings of a band such as the incredible Expanding Mindfuck all of that much, and has really used all of those years and all of those albums worth of musical wisdom in order to craft probably the perfect masterpiece. Some people have already said that Hand Cannot Erase is the wall for the Facebook age. I'm not going to go quite that far, because I think it's an unfair comparison. I think that Hand Cannot Erase is the Hand Cannot Erase for the Facebook generation, but I agree with the notion that this is an album that people will be talking about for a long period of time. You combine the artistry and the charm, the just overall masterful workings of a band such as Porcupine Tree, and you add in the subtleties that no man accomplished. You bring the softness and the kind of caressing depression that a band such as Blackfield can sometimes incorporate. You throw them all together, you add in the identity that Steven has been able to forge for himself through these solo works, through previous albums such as The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories or Grace for Drowning, and you really get within this witch's brew, within this devil's delicatessen, an album that just breathes on its own and captivates every second of the way, playfully jabs at one of our probably darkest fears, but delivers probably one of the most heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, but also heartwarming albums that have surfaced throughout the past probably 10 years. It's an album that is able to explore the life of this lady. It's an album that's able to state that I had a sister for a couple of months, but then it got to the point where I forgot things about her. I forgot the clothes that she wore. I forgot everything until eventually I forgot her name. It's an idea, it's a paragraph that you hear, it's spoken word, that seems almost impossible, that we would forget somebody that was that close to us. But that's exactly what this story is telling. That for 3 years it seemed as though this woman who was loved and popular, who people cared about, was invisible, was meaningless. It's as though she never existed in the first place. It was all just a figment of individuals' imaginations, a legend almost that was constructed that just so happened to have a body to go along with it. But that didn't seem to matter. It's an album that starts off with a massive 10-minute long opus after First Regret, a 2-minute long opener. 3 years older, we have just a terrific, terrific opener, a great element that just is able to construct and paint the picture of love, but also of eventual forgetfulness. And then we move on, we move forward, we dive a little bit more into this, and we start to recognize the melancholy. We start to get injections of the more depressing side. We start to get this all, though, through multiple different stylings. Some electronic fused music in here that's an element that has always been part of Steven's love throughout the course of his life and his career. We get the prog rock simplicities that we've heard with bands such as Blackfield that are subtly also being jabbed. And then we also, as we get further on board, even get a little bit of that hard, aggressive side that we were seeing on Porcupine Tree albums such as In Absentia. And I'm talking with that side more so with Ancestral, with track number 9 on this album, which also spans 13 minutes of length. One that starts off with a little bit more of that electronic fusion, something where you're not quite sure where this whole thing is going to go, and then it just explodes. Probably the last 20 minutes of this album, 6 of which I would have missed had I followed the World Health Organization's guidelines. So I would have missed about 5 minutes, maybe 4 minutes of Happy Returns in the latter portion of Ascendant here on, are probably some of the most heartbreaking chords that I've heard in a long time. Because you listen to and you kind of follow along with the story. You get into that emotional wavelength. You dial that emotional address, almost like this is an emotional stargate that takes you to your deepest fears and your deepest of regrets. The melancholy becomes real. The emotion becomes real. The feeling boils over to the surface until it spills around you. Albums that are truthfully great, that have majesty and splendor, that is exactly what they do. That is why they have such an elevated importance in our life. Ones that make us do what we as human beings, what is the core of us as human beings, which is feel. Those are the albums that transform our lives. Those are the albums that are talked about generations from now. Those are the songs, the tracks, the chords, the tones, the subtleties that are mentioned over the course of decades, generations. People will remember The Wall. People will talk about The Wall and Wish You Were Here, other works from Pink Floyd. They'll talk about Brain Salad Surgery from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They're obviously going to talk about songs from more conventional radio rock bands such as Journey or Boston. And then there's going to be Hand Cannot Erase. There's going to be this masterpiece that is going to be explored by the lucky few here in this generation. But it's going to be one that is going to be mentioned, and this is just my feeling, but I think that it's accurate. It's going to be mentioned so many times in so many lists of so many books, written by dedicated and passionate musical individuals that want to see this masterpiece reach the light of day. I may author one myself. I don't know what my future holds. I just hope that if I were to die, that it wouldn't take 3 years for someone to notice that I was gone. But this will be an album that is talked about. This will be an album that will be recommended. This will be an album that will be on one of those lists such as 500 albums you must hear before you die. It has all of those principles that are required. I can't find a flaw. And that bothers me. It bothers me because I feel like I'm going to re-examine this album a couple of months from now and maybe find one. But I've been through this album left, right, up, down 10 different times. And I can't find a single flaw. The only flaw that I find is in my own human emotion, because it seems like every time I scatter through it to try to find said flaw, I only get sucked in even further. And I showcase more emotion. I think more deeply about this very story, this very situation, this very idea. And it causes emotion. It causes great, great feeling of melancholy and somewhat loneliness. I can't believe this. It's been such a great career for you, Mr. Wilson. I feel as though I'm Dennis the Menace by calling you Mr. Wilson like that. Please don't take an insult of that. But I've awarded this honor to, I believe, only 2 albums. But now it's, I believe, a 3rd. Hand Cannot Erase by Steven Wilson has achieved a 100 out of 100, a perfect score. Absolute, sheer brilliance. Tremendous, transformative perfection. It's an album that this age is fortunate enough to have. But the sadness is that, unlike an album such as, The Wall, unlike an album such as perhaps the first one from Boston, or whatever you may consider to be a reflective tome of the 70s or 80s or a time past, this is an album that will not have sales of 10 million copies. But it should. 2015 has a perfect album. This is it. Nation, what do you guys think? I think this is brilliance. Underscored within 66 minutes. I don't know if I could use any other words. Thank you for this gift, Steve. Mr. Wilson. Hey, Mr. Wilson! Say hi to Mike and the boys in Opeth for me. Thanks. This is exactly what music needed in 2015, and I mean that.